Hi, and welcome to Code Tutorials. Today we'll be talking about styling contact forms made using the Contact Forms 7 plugin. To help us do this, we'll be using one of the widgets from the Qi Addons For Elementor collection, the Contact Forms 7 widget to be precise. Using this widget, you can change how your forms will look thanks to a wealth of user-friendly options. Those options include the possibility of changing label fonts and colors, adjusting field colors for normal and active display, and adding borders to them. You can also combine the Contact Forms 7 widget with others from the Qi Addons collection, such as section titles, images, and more. It's up to you to decide what works best for you and your site. This page we're on right now provides us with some examples of this widget's use. As you can see, there are a lot of possibilities for variation depending on the options you choose to use. And during the course of this video, I'll be walking you through the Contact Forms 7 widget's various options. Please note, we'll be looking at the widget, not the plugin. So you'll need to have a form made using the plugin that you want to style. The point of the Contact Forms 7 widget is to make it a lot easier to style contact forms, but it is not intended for actually making them. That's what the plugin is for, and I've left you a link to the plugin's documentation with tips on how to get started in the description below. To get started with the widget, we need to add it to our page. This is the page I'll be working on. I'm copying one of the designs from the widget's page, so I already set up the background image and text. I added them to give a bit of context to the element I'll be setting up. But as they are not the focus of this tutorial, I'll only briefly explain how I added them to the page. This image is set as a background to the section where I will be placing my contact form. If you want to do the same, just open the section editing options, go to the Style tab, then in the Stop section for the background, pick the classic background type and use the image field to upload your chosen image. And if you want the image to seemingly move as you scroll, then you'll want to keep the attachment set to fixed and the size set to cover. So that's the image, and the text on top of it is in a section title element. Now for our form. We'll start by looking for our element in the Elementor sidebar. Contact Form 7, there it is. Drag it over to the right. And this is what the default style of a contact form looks like. The form itself is one I created in the Contact Form 7 plugin. Our page element, the widget we're looking at, automatically displays one of your available forms. You can choose the specific one that gets shown by picking it from this drop-down menu. Please note, depending on what you name the forms you create, the items in this drop-down menu will likely have different names. I have the form I'm using open in this tab. This is what my contact form looks like within the plugin. If we look at the left, we can see I'm within the Contact Form section looking at the contact form. And this contact form is called Contact Form number 4. So this is the title field. And below that we have this box where you'd add the HTML representing your contact form. So this is where you'd create your contact form and specify which fields in which order will be shown in it. Once you've done that, you'll be able to choose that form using this option here. So the content is sorted within the plugin, but the style is what we'll be using the Contact Form 7 widget to change. That's why there are so few options within the Content tab. Other than the ability to choose a form, we have the developer tools here. They contain only one option, which, if enabled, will display the widget in the form of a standard WordPress shortcode, like this. Okay, I'll put this back now. And below that, we have some links to various resources you can use for help, should you need it. And this is it for the Content tab. Let's move on to the Style tab and see what we have in there. The first set of options is for the label style. Labels are these pieces of text above the input fields. Since they represent the text content, we have typography settings we can use for them. With them, we can pick the font family for the labels. You can scroll through this list or search for the font you want to use. Then we can change the label size by using this slider or by typing in a new value. After that, we have the weight option where we can change the font weight for the labels. Then the text transform option lets us change our labels to uppercase, lowercase, capitalized, or we can keep them normal. And we have the style option, which we can use to change the text style. Following that, the decoration lets us add a line over, through, or under our label text. Then the line height lets us adjust the height of the line with our labels. so you can get more space if you need it. And the letter spacing option lets us create more space between individual letters. That's it for the typography options. Besides them, we have this option for changing the label color. You can pick any shade you like if the default one isn't working for you. Then we have the input style options. These are for adjusting the fields under the labels, and they are twofold. There are the options for the normal display and the active display, which is when we are actively working on a field. Starting with the normal options, we have the input typography. These options will apply to the text you type into a field, like test here. And if we look, these options are the same as the ones we saw for the label typography, so I don't think there's any need to waste your time by going over them again. So next, we have the input color. You can pick any shade you like and it will be shown on the text you input, such as the text I typed in here. For this, I'll set a light gray shade. There. Then after that, we have the input background color. As you can see, this changes the color that fills the input fields. And if you look at the one where I've written test, the word remains visible because this is a color for the background. And I'll set plain white for mine. Okay. Next, we have the border type option. This allows us to set a border that would frame the input fields, and we'd see it here and here. Let me show you what it would look like. I'll set solid and give it a width so it becomes visible. There. Now the input fields have this thick gray border around them. You can easily change the color if you want. Simply use the slider or add a hex code. And we can do one more thing for the border, and that is to create a radius. This lets us round out the corners of the input fields. You can see what happens when I increase the value here. We get softly rounded corners. By the way, you can set a radius even if you don't want to use a border. I'll remove the width, which will remove the border. And there. The fields have retained their rounded edges. Okay, I'll set 0 here to remove any radius. There. And now we can check out the settings under Active. At first glance, these options seem familiar. We have the input text typography, and when we click on it, it reveals the same selection of typography options that we've seen already. However, these are for the focus text. The focus text is the text you're working on, the one in the field you select or one you're actively typing in. So you can set that text apart and make it easily distinguishable as a focus point. To help with that, we also have the input focus color. I'll set this one, for example. Nothing changes immediately, but when I click, the new color appears as this text becomes something I'm working on. And for this, I'll set a dark gray shade. This will help the focus text pop from the rest of the form. After this, we have the input focus background color. So if I set this and click on a field, that field will reflect the color I've selected. All the other fields will remain their original color as they are not being actively worked on. Okay, then we have another instance of the border type option. I'll set solid just to show you and give it a width. And then, when I click on a field to work in it, the border appears. If you decide to use this, don't forget you can easily change the color too. Alright, I'll clear all these as my design doesn't include these options. And we can move on to the next segment, which is the checkbox style. Checkboxes are these little squares you can tick as a way of filling in the form. The first option in here allows us to change the checkbox size. When I start to drag the slider, it starts from 1 pixel, so the checkbox is tiny at the start. But if you keep dragging the slider, it increases. I'll leave mine at 14 pixels. Then we have the checkbox margin. When I increase this, the space around the checkbox grows. And all this free space here is the margin I just added. So you can increase all sides evenly, or you can click here, which will delink the field, so you can input different values for each side of the checkbox. For my part, I'll just add 50 pixels on the right, so that the checkbox and its label are separated a bit. And we also have the checkbox space between option for separating the checkboxes from the labels that precede them. So we create this space. For this option, the checkbox and the label are considered as a unit, and it's these units that you separate by adding space here. I'll add 50 pixels for mine. Then we have the checkbox holder margin. And you can see as I increase, this creates more space around both our checkbox and label units. So the margin you add with this option goes around the space that holds the checkboxes and their labels. I want to set different values for this, so I'll delink the fields again and put -4 at the top and 5 pixels at the bottom. Don't worry, I'll be adjusting the space between the input fields and the checkboxes later when we come to the appropriate options. And that's it for checkbox style. Our next section is for radio style. With the options in here, we can style these two radio buttons. For starters, we can change their size. You can increase the button like so. I'll set 14 pixels for mine. Then we have the radio button margin. This lets us create more space around the buttons themselves. If I start to increase, we can see the space around the buttons grows so they get like a buffer around them. Just like with the checkboxes, I don't want the same values on all sides, so click here and I'll just set 7 pixels on the right. All the others can stay 0. I wanted to use this to create the space between the radio button and its label. Okay. After this, we have the radio space between, which, like the checkboxes, is for the space between one radio button and label unit and the other radio button and label unit. So an increase here will make them draw apart. I'll set this to 24 pixels. Then we have the radio holder margin, which is for adding margins to the space that holds both my radio button and label units. If I start to increase all sides at the same time, it would look something like this. Instead, I'll delink the fields and just set a top margin of 28 pixels. And that's the radio style options covered. Our next section is for the button style. And the button in question is this one here, essentially the one that submits the form. The first thing in here is the button typography. The options are already familiar and there's nothing about the button text style that I want to change, so let's move on. Below this we have the normal and active switches again. Under normal we have the button color. This option is for the button text color while it's displayed normally. For the changes on hover, we'll be looking at the settings under active in a moment. For now, I'll just make the text even lighter by picking white as my color. Okay, next, there's the button background color. You can change it to anything you like. I'll add a hex code to get the exact shade of dark gray I want. And if you like, you can add a button border color. Let me show you. I'll pick a color and select the border style. And then set a width so the border becomes visible. There. So these options let you frame your button. That's not part of my planned design, so I'll just remove the settings I made. Okay. After this, we have the button border radius. And you don't need to have a border for this option to work. You can see as I start to increase, the button's corners get curved. If you had a border, that would get curved alongside the button. Alright, let's take a look at the settings under active now. The first one is for setting the hover color for the button text. So it can look something like this. I'll set white for mine. Then we have the button hover background color. So that's the color that appears on hover. Right now my button has the same color for both hover and normal display. But you can make these different if you want, like this for example. For my button, I'll set solid black as the hover color. There. Now hovering makes the button darken subtly. Other than this, we have the option to set a button hover border color. As with the borders we've seen so far, you need to set a color, style, and width for your border to make it appear. Since we saw how that, as well as the radius, looks using the normal settings, I don't think we need to go over it again. Instead, let's take a look at the button full width option. It's disabled by default, but if you switch it to yes, then the button will expand to match the width of the contact form. I'm happy with the original button, so I'll restore it. And that wraps up this section, and we can move on to the spacing style options. And the first one, form item space, let me show you, creates more space above and below each input field in the contact form. That means input fields and checkboxes and radio buttons are all treated as items, and this space is added over and under each of them. However, you can also delink the fields here and add separate values for the top. I'll put 14 pixels so we get this, And for the bottom, I'll put 33 so we have even more space below the fields. After that, we have the input padding. That is for the text you input. I'll type in test once more. And now when I start to increase, we can see how the field around the text expands because it's being pushed out by the padding. You can keep increasing and the fields will keep growing. But if I clear the values and delink the fields, then the padding is reduced to 0 and there's no additional space around the input text, as we can see. I'm going to put 5 pixels for all sides except the left. There. And for the left, I'll set 20 pixels, so I have this nice indent for my text. Okay. Following this, we have the button margin option. That's for the button at the bottom, this one. By increasing the values here, you create more space around the button. Again, I'll delink the fields here so I can add only one value, and that's 8 pixels at the top. Now we have a bit more space between the form bottom and the submit button. The option after this one is for the padding around the button text. When I begin to increase, the count starts from 1 pixel, so the button first shrinks before it starts to grow larger. And keeping the field linked means that the space, the padding, is the same on all sides of the button text. I prefer separating these, so that's what I'll do. And I'll add 14 pixels at the top, 40 on the right, 13 at the bottom, and 40 on the left. And there, that looks much nicer. Moving on to global style, this section has only one option, the alignment. This determines the alignment of everything in your contact form. By default, it's set to left, but you can switch it to center, and then it will look like this. All the labels, buttons, checkboxes, and so on will be centered. Or you can switch it to the right, which looks like this. I'll set mine to be in the center. After this, we have the error style section. The error style lets us style the text that will appear under the affected input field, notifying users of an error. And the response style will be shown under the form explaining what went wrong. We can't see these from this page from the backend. We need to be filling in the form on the front end for this. So I'll quickly style the error and response messages. I already know the design I'm working toward, and then we'll see what they look like. So in error style, I'll set the alignment to match the rest of the form by putting it in the center. Then in the typography options, I'll set only what I need, and that is font size, 17 pixels. And line height, I'll use pixels, will be 26. Then for error color, the color of the text noting an error has occurred, I'll set a shade of red. There. And finally, we have the error margin, which will create a buffer of space around the error message text. I'll delink the field so I can input only the values I want, which is 9 pixels at the top. And that's it. Now, in the response style section, and as I mentioned, these options are for styling the message that would appear underneath the form, directing you to check the error message you got or explaining why something went wrong. To be specific, I'll be showing you the invalid response to a form submission. And as you can see, there are several responses you can get, but we'll get to that in a minute. Going back to the top, our first option is for adjusting the message typography. I'll only use the size option to set 17 pixels for the message text. Then you can change the color of that text, but I'm happy keeping mine set to the default gray. And you can set a padding around the response message text. I'm going to delink the fields and set relatively generous paddings all around as I plan on using a border, and that border will frame the message and its padding. There. And for the response margin, I'll only set 40 pixels at the top so the message is separated somewhat from the rest of the form. Finally, I can set the border. I'll use the solid type. And I'll set the width to 1 pixel. And I won't be adding a color here as that will leave me with the same border no matter the response type. Instead, I want to set different colors for different responses using the options below. However, if you prefer something more striking, you can use the classic background type to set a solid color background or upload an image. Alternatively, you have the gradient background type for setting a 2-color gradient background for your message. Okay. Next, we have the options for picking border colors depending on the type of response message. For confirmation of sent messages, i.e. submitted forms, I'll set green. There. For failure to send, I'll set red. Just a sec. Then for spam submissions, I'll use orange. Okay. And finally, for invalid input, I'll use yellow. Think of it as a traffic light system. And that's it. We covered all the options in the Contact Form 7 widget. So I can update the page to save my work. And then we can see what these error and response messages look like in practice. So this is my contact form. It has the design I wanted. Everything is set up the way I planned it. And now we can try it out. To do that, I'll click here and then click here to open the page front end. And here we are. It's just a test page, so there's nothing other than this section here. And when I look at the form, the email field is going to help us with this. I'll add the @ sign and click to submit as if I'd filled in the entire form. And there, I've gotten error messages. For one, the @ sign can't replace a proper email address. And for another, I skipped the required field. And in both cases, error messages are shown. Messages that I just styled in the back end. However, keep in mind that their content and which fields are required and what form their input needs to take is all set in the Contact Form 7 plugin. The widget is only here to help us style what we create in the plugin. And if we look below, we can see how I styled the response message that has appeared underneath the form. As I mentioned, I decided to keep it transparent with the border around the text and its padding. The border is yellow at the moment because the message is here as a response to invalid input. If it had failed to send, the border would be red, and if I successfully submitted the form, the response message would be framed in green. That's why I wanted to set different colors for different response types. And that's all. We've seen how the form looks and behaves after going over all its style options. Now if we look back on the widgets page, we can see the different things we can do with the Contact Form 7 widget and the potential variations we can make using it. When it comes to style, your imagination is the limit, and this widget offers so many options that you will be spoiled for choice. You can take some of the designs you see on this page and copy them, as I did, or you can use them as inspiration when styling your own contact forms. Or you can go for a middle ground and use one of these designs with your custom adjustments. It's entirely up to you. I hope going through this together has helped you to see how easy styling forms can be with the Qi Addons For Elementor plugin and its Contact Form 7 widget. If you have any questions, comments or suggestions, please drop us a line in the comments below. Also, make sure to subscribe to our channel and be the first to learn about new theme guides and tutorials. Thanks for watching.